don't really know just how many people in the United States use cocaine, either regularly or on a social basis, but they do know that the statistics and the numbers are growing alarmingly. What is not known is the effect of the drug, its dangers, and actually some of its benefits in some cases. We have with us three men on Panorama right now who can talk about that. We first have Bruce Van Meter, who's the Assistant Chief of South American Operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Then Dr. Robert C. Peterson, who's the Assistant Director for Program Integration and Coordination of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And we have Mark Shore, who's an investigative reporter for New York Magazine. Mark is one of the authors, or the author of a series in New York Magazine on cocaine in New York City. And the problems and that he outlines in that article are some of the things we're going to be talking about cocaine now. Mark, let me start with you first. How serious is cocaine usage in the country these days?
It's pretty serious. It really is the drug of choice among a lot of people.
I heard one time that it's pushing out wine in popularity among people.
Well, it's the same sort of mystique. If you want the snob appeal of wine, you can have the snob appeal of cocaine, and it's a lot more expensive than all but the finest wines. And it's a subtle drug, so you're not inebriated in any way, but there's the status of the price alone, which is $100 really for a gram, and that won't last very long.
Dr. Peterson, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, has been working for a long time. You have a book, or a report actually, that from 1977 that gives a good deal of information about cocaine, not only its history, but in addition to that, some of the things that you have found out about the dangers of it. Tell us some of those.
Well, the dangers are, aside from the obvious danger of getting arrested for its use, there is the possibility, if you use it heavily, that your nose will begin to be eroded within the nose. The septum is affected adversely by the cocaine, and you gradually get symptoms that start out like those of a bad head cold. Keeping your nose clear so that you can breathe.
That's a common thing with cocaine users, but is that for regular cocaine users or even those who use it infrequently?
Well, the more frequently used, the greater the symptoms, to the point where the drug will eventually eat away the linings of the nose, and we will sometimes actually get a breakthrough between the nostrils, and the septum will become perforated.
Mr. Van Meter, in the Drug Enforcement Administration, you've got your work cut out for you trying to stop the flow of cocaine if that many people are using it. Where's it all coming from?
Cocaine originates, coca leaf is grown in Peru and Bolivia and produced or processed into a paste or base, primarily in those two countries. Most of it then goes to Colombia, where it's further processed into cocaine hydrochloride, and from there it's smuggled into primarily the east coast of the United States.
Now, according to Mark's article in New York Magazine, there's one neighborhood in New York City that seems to be the capital of cocaine distribution in the United States. And it's a neighborhood that I know of personally, but I had no idea that it was that much. Jackson Heights?
Right, in north central Queens.
It used to be a nice residential little area.
It still is a nice residential area, fairly low street crime. It's good, no problems with abandoned buildings, things like that. But there's a large Colombian community there, and it is run as a family operation in a lot of sense, and most of the paste is processed in Colombia and then brought up, or it's refined and brought up to the U.S., and since there are all these Colombians there, they just handle it as a family business. And that really, it is the cocaine capital, or the mouth of the cocaine pipeline.
I was reading where there are something like 12 real estate dealers in one block in Jackson Heights, because the cocaine dealers like to have 3 or 4 different apartments, and in the process of doing so, they make the real estate business rather lucrative in that area.
A lot of safe houses and things like that, and shift around, and a place to keep your family, and a place to conduct business, and a place to store your drugs, a place to keep a mistress, and an emergency place that no one knows about just to run to when it gets too hot.
Mr. Van Meter, the DEA in doing all this has some general methods involved in this. We have a film clip that shows at least the general dealings between, I suppose, a dealer and a buyer. Isn't that right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. The film shows what happens between a deal, how the cocaine is sold, how it's tested, checked, and things like that. And the film clip is a rather interesting examination. I understand that the dealer involved here is in fact a dealer, but this was, some of it was staged, is that right?
It is staged. The dealer is, however, has been in the past a legitimate dealer.
So he knows what he's doing.
Yes, he's very, very familiar with the whole process.
Okay, well, let's take a look at that now then.
Assuming that I was to go out this afternoon, whether it be here, Louisiana, Chicago, Detroit, or whatever, to purchase an ounce of narcotics, there's a lot of things that I need to know before I go out there. To learn these things, why don't we put ourselves in the position that I'm working for you, that you're either too busy, getting large enough in your own business that you don't have time for it, or you're just backing away from it. And you're going to send me out to purchase an ounce from somebody that you know. Why don't you tell me what I need to expect and what I need to do?
You press the issue about measuring, about sifting it, then you sift it, you know. So, like I said, he might measure it out to you first. He might come out with a bag maybe like this and run it through the sifter.
Or he may just say, go ahead and measure it as your own.
Measure yourself.
So if he presses the issue of sifting it, then
Sift it.
pour some in the sifter like that.
Right. Pour it through the sifter like this. Then you take the spoon and you hit it and spread it. This way you get a chance to see the crystals, you see the sparkles in it, and you know that the cocaine is real. That's because you can put more cuts on a boy than you can on the girl.
Oh, okay, that's right. You said you're going to put 4 at the most with cocaine. You can put 7, 8, 10 on that.
And the boy, right. And you don't got quite a 6 here.
It's close enough for measurement purposes. So
Yes, it's close enough for measurement purposes.
what's the purpose of putting it in balloons so you can put it in your mouth or?
Put it in your mouth, you carry it, you put about 5 or 6 of these in your mouth, or 10 of them if you want, and they don't get wet,
I see.
but you make another knot because you're gonna put it in a balloon more than one time. You wanna make sure it don't get wet. But you wanna use the same balloon, you don't wanna just keep using balloons over and over, so you make 2 knots.
Mm-hmm. Then what do you do? Okay.
After you make a knot, you put it down on the table, and you pull them.
And you,
Take your razor, and you cut it in the middle,
right between the 2 knots.
right between the 2 knots. And you still got a knot at the bottom of your balloon. You got this one wrapped up, and you put it back into the balloon again.
The interesting thing that I noticed in that film was that the guy obviously knew what he was talking about. I never heard of the use of balloons, I suppose, to run the stuff around town, but I suppose that is pretty well used. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, in fact, there was a case not too long ago where someone was using balloons for smuggling, and he swallowed a whole bunch of them, and they ruptured. 2 of them ruptured in his stomach, and he died.
Cocaine overdose?
Yeah, I mean, he just watched.
That's actually a pretty frequent occurrence. They do transport quite a bit of cocaine in balloons or other type of rubber containers, which have on several occasions burst in their stomach, causing a cocaine overdose death.
Now, one of the things that people who use cocaine seem to believe is that cocaine is safe, that it is a safe drug, like, for example, marijuana, that there are no side effects, that there are no real problems with cocaine, that it is safe. Is that correct?
This is misleading because any drug, if you take it in very, very small quantities, very infrequently almost, is likely to be relatively safe. The reason why cocaine has a reputation for safety in the United States is most people are really more experimenters than users. It's sort of the chic, in thing to use cocaine if you can afford it. And as a result, people use small quantities. They get no obvious ill effects. Even the nose effects don't occur on very infrequent use. They are not likely to get the symptoms like delirium tremens, like the symptoms of advanced alcoholism that you would get with heavy use. So what we're really talking about is a situation in which the price of cocaine is very high, its availability is comparatively low. As a result, people don't experience the unhappy symptoms that they say get in Peru, where individuals use in much larger quantities because the drug is cheaper and more available, and where they show the classical symptoms that were reported in the late 19th century in Europe, when cocaine became a very popular drug for medical uses.
Well, one remembers Sherlock Holmes doing cocaine, and using cocaine on a regular basis in the Arthur Conan Doyle. There is that mystique, there is that stylishness, and is that the reason for its popularity, Mark?
Yeah, that marijuana, I think, is too common now almost. And a lot of people who grew up with sort of the illegal kick of marijuana, the prohibition mentality, now they can go to cocaine, which is still very illegal, and the penalty's very severe. And it isn't detrimental. Another thing that might add is that the cocaine distributed on the street is so diluted that it really it's more dilutant, much more dilutant than anything else. And while it will numb your nose just because they'll use something like lidocaine to cut it, the actual effects of cocaine are negligible and below a certain dilution.
Well, because of the middleman situation, Mr. Van Meter, I imagine there's a strong temptation to cut it at each point down the line, even more as it gets toward the consumer.
Yes, cocaine is very much diluted from the time it leaves the factory or the laboratory in Colombia as, say, 100% cocaine hydrochloride. When it reaches the street and reaches the consumer, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 12% purity cocaine. The rest, the other 88% being some type of dilutant.
And they use a number of different kinds. They use some kind of sugars too, natural sugars, don't they?
They use some milk sugar, Novocaine,
Glucose,
lidocaine,
lactose, that kind of thing.
Right.
almost any type of
Any
dilutant
white
you can
powder,
fit in.
basically. And it depends on the effect. If you want increased volume, like you fluff it up, you can put it in a blender and use one kind of diluent. If you want increased weight,
Mix some air in
Right.
with it, huh?
Now,
could
since
put it in
cocaine is a local anesthetic, what they use are other drugs that are local anesthetics like lidocaine, where you will get a numbing effect, and the user will get the impression that he's getting cocaine because he tends to judge it by that effect.
Yeah, that is preferred over lactose or something of that type because of the added, or the similarity in effect that you get from lidocaine or procaine.
But they also mix like amphetamines and heroin sometimes.
Again, for the same, in the case of amphetamines, it's also a energizing drug, so you get effects that are very similar. In fact, in the laboratory situation, if you inject an individual with amphetamine and the same individual at some later point or at a different point with cocaine, he can't tell the difference when you inject it intravenously.
We're going to talk some more about cocaine in just a moment, talk about its effects on you if you took it or used it. Stay where you are. Used to use cocaine in Coca-Cola. You remember back in the early turn of the century when the Atlanta pharmacists came up with a stomach remedy and headache remedy called Coca-Cola, and then they turned it into a soft drink later, there was actually cocaine in it. And if I remember correctly, back in the turn of the century, they used to call Coca-Cola, back where I come from, in Atlanta and in the South, dope. And when a Coca-Cola wagon would come around to the factories and the mills and everything, they would say, "Here comes the dope wagon." All this is coming back to me now. But they did use it medicinally.
It was used in tonics, it was used in all kinds of preparations. There was a wine called Vin Mariani that was whose virtues were attested to by people ranging from the Pope to the then President of the United States. It was very widely
loaded
used.
with cocaine.
It was
Yeah.
loaded with cocaine.
I hasten to add, however, that they do not use cocaine in Coca-Cola now. That's a long time ago, and it's perfectly straight stuff now, so take it easy. We were talking about the physical effects of cocaine. Now, there's a lot of misrepresentation, and nobody really knows what there are. I mean, there's some general physical effects that happen when you use the drug. But what are we talking about?
well, it's a stimulant, and it stimulates the central nervous system. It also is alleged to have all sorts of aphrodisiac effects and things like that, which is also part of the mystique. And for the effects, right?
Really, a great deal of what we're talking about when we talk about any drug, including cocaine, we can explain a lot better the differences in opinions, partly related to dose. We're talking about how much people take. Partly, we've also got to expect that the individual's expectations and the setting, the circumstance under which he takes the drug. If, for example, you believe a drug is aphrodisiac, creates sexual desire, it's likely to. Many, for example, coke users report that they don't have any such effect. So that partly it's a matter of what you anticipate, partly it's a circumstance, the person you're with, total gestalt, the whole situation.
Everything that is around you at the time. I read also that in addition to the snorting and the injection of cocaine, it's also, you rub it on the gums, or people also are rubbing it on the gums. And I also read that women are inserting the cocaine in their vaginal tracts. Isn't that correct? They're putting it in there.
It can be absorbed from any mucous membrane, so any mucous area is potentially capable of absorbing the coke. The nose is used because it's a convenient place to use. You could use other places.
They've developed a new use for it also. In some of the Latin countries, they're now smoking the cocaine paste, which is the first step from the coca leaf. And many of the users there are putting this paste in cigarettes or at times marijuana cigarettes and smoking it and getting the combined effect of marijuana and cocaine.
You know, we were talking. I was reading your report on much of this, and also Mark's story in New York Magazine, and most of the people who were talking about their cocaine use are talking about a feeling of power, a feeling of not only stimulation but of self-assuredness, and those kind of feelings. Is that commonly?
Cocaine confidence is
Cocaine confidence is what it's called.
Yeah, which you also can get to some extent from any amphetamine or any stimulant like that. You just feel up and ready to jog a couple of miles or take on the world.
Yeah.
But cocaine, from what I understand, gives them a little special effect. They become very talkative, and it does give them this feeling of self-assurance and being able to conquer the world or whatever, if you will.
Well, what about the effects of coke and marijuana now? I mean, it seems to me that one would sort of counterbalance the other.
People like, it takes some of the edge off when you mix. That was, you mentioned heroin and cocaine is sometimes mixed. I think it's called a San Francisco speedball. And that also, people like mixing ups and downs, and just when you're experimenting with drugs, you just see what sort of effect it has, like 2/3 cocaine, 1/3 heroin, or reverse it around for either an edge or level or whatever you want.
We were talking about Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle's mysteries using cocaine, but there's an even more factual example. Sigmund Freud recommended cocaine use to his friend von Fleisching.
Yes.
Von Fleisching. Well, tell me about that.
Well, basically, von Fleischl was addicted to morphine because he had a neurological disease which resulted in considerable pain, and he appealed to Freud for a way to get off the morphine. He then became the first cocaine-dependent person, perhaps in history, in the sense that he began using it very regularly. He began use by injection, and very soon he was experiencing symptoms like alcoholic DTs. He also had the feeling that
He imagined snakes crawling all over him, right?
Insects were crawling over his skin. That's a very common symptom.
What it's called in
Creepy crawlies?
Creepy crawlies.
Is that common in cocaine?
If you have enough.
Very
long
common
enough
with
time.
amphetamine also,
Yeah.
which is like one step further and more open to abuse just because it's cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the kind of thing. You know, doctors have, I guess, the potential availability of cocaine
Not
in
easily.
its drug form. Well, I mean, but still, are doctors cocaine users?
Go ahead.
I think they get illegally. They get cocaine because the only legal use, pretty much I know of, is for nose jobs. They use it as an anesthetic, but they do abuse it because they can afford it. Especially a lot of doctors have a lot of tax-free cash, and it's one way to spend it.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Riverdale?
Yes, I think so. There is very little legitimate use for cocaine, and if doctors do use it, it would come from the illicit market and not diverted from the licit market.
See, it only has the major medical uses as a combined anesthetic and
Local
vasoconstrictor.
anesthetic,
Yeah,
yeah.
it has one property that's very important, in that it not only anesthetizes the nose, but it also constricts the blood vessels so that when you do an operation in that area, you don't get the profuse bleeding, as well as limiting the pain. So that's a very important medical use.
Well, now, it's currently a very expensive drug. What does it sell for on the street now?
It sells for on the street from $2,000 to $3,000 per ounce. From depending on the area where it's purchased, if you're in an area where it's more available, such as Miami or New York, it will run from $85 up to a high of about $175 per gram.
A gram is a 30th of an ounce, right?
Right.
1/28.
Yeah, of an ounce.
This same drug that's selling for $2,000 to $3,000 an ounce, when it originates in Bolivia, Peru, it makes for the farmer about $250 for the equivalent of 1 kilo, what will produce eventually 1 kilo of cocaine, which will sell in Colombia or one of the other countries that produces it. It'll sell for from $8,000 to $15,000 per kilo. In the U.S.,
Right away, you've got an immediate markup.
Right. That same kilo then arriving in the U.S., uncut or more or less uncut, would sell for approximately $40,000. When it is cut to street purity, which is about 12%, that same kilo, the original kilogram of cocaine, would be worth or sell for in the neighborhood of $800,000.
Well, that obviously brings in organized crime. In the Jackson Heights area that we were talking about earlier, that seems to be the funnel for much of the cocaine use in the United States, there were 27 murders last year.
28. There was one 2 days after my article came out. There was another
one,
murder.
is that right? 28 murders last year. That crime, obviously organized crime, seems to be in this. Is that your assumption?
It's not the traditional organized crime to some extent, although there were recent Senate hearings where they had an informer testify about a traditional organized crime person who testified about his cocaine ring that they were running through Florida. But it's organized crime, and that it's organized. It's not the mafia per se that's really handling the volume in this. It is the Colombian organized crime. They estimate from 14 to 20 groups. They really don't know. They don't have the neat charts that they have for all the...
You linked the cocaine trade to that bombing at LaGuardia Airport, didn't you?
Yes, there was a substantial investigation over that. They had received information from an informant. The area around LaGuardia has been a big area for dealing, and storing drugs or storing cash or just making pickups in general from a locker is a common procedure. You know, you give someone buys a key, literally a key for a locker for, $20,000 or whatever, and in there is whatever he's bought. And the bombing, they received information from an informant in prison that someone who had stolen a large amount of cash then was supposed to make another pickup, and someone had planted the bomb there to get him. But the person went to the bar instead of going to pick up the thing, and it blew up, and he missed it, the initial target.
If cocaine were legalized, would that bring the street price down considerably?
Well, if you consider that a dose, an average dose is medically procured, legally procured, is about 10 cents, and compare that to, say, at least $10, 100 times as much that it costs illegally, obviously one of our real concerns is not so much with the cocaine use currently, which is episodic in small amounts and so on, aside from the organized crime and the rest of it that's involved in it. There's the real concern about what would happen if this became a legal drug on the basis of the erroneous implication that it's somehow safe. It's not.
Yeah, it is not safe. We know.
Not in any quantity, not used regularly.
So the dosage then, or one dose of cocaine, would then be down to the pennies rather than the dollars. Is that right?
That's right.
Like the price of Quaaludes legally is something like 10 cents per Quaalude or less, and on the street it's about $3 for a Quaalude.
Gentlemen, thank you for being with us on Panorama today to talk about this drug of the rich. I don't suppose there are any major efforts now in getting cocaine legalized, but who knows? Who knows? It's a serious problem all the way across the country. The article that Mark Shore has written is in the September 25th edition of New York Magazine. It's a fascinating study on who uses cocaine, why, and where it's coming from, and the abuse of it as well. Thanks a lot for being with us on Panorama.